Cambridge thing. Do you feel that those students might find it difficult to get into like high school and like do the SATs or?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's twofold. It really is student dependent,
Okay.
very much student dependent, and how much they adapt. I usually find a lot of those students that have had more of an advanced curriculum in an American-based school, like in Dubai or in Saudi or in the UK. Their curricular training is usually a little bit further along than most U.S. students. So they come back from an academic rigor standpoint. I would say that they should be here during the high school years because that's really going to level the playing field, especially in these really competitive type programs, if that's something you want to go. I would say that then when they get back, how well they get on with other kids, how much they want to be involved, that helps significantly. So if they're in the speech team and they do a scholastic bowl and they do, I don't know, theater or whatever the case, those type of things, and have a handful of different activities and stay consistent over those 4 years to build the relationships, maybe aspire to becoming treasurer or vice president or president. Those things in its collection will show tremendous amount of persistence, continuity, and dedication to the field. So then you add that with your grades that you're going to be getting. You do well in your SAT. Now you have a portfolio when you go to apply that these college programs are like, hey, this student, even though they studied overseas, look what they did in these 4 years and what they made of themselves and how competitive and well-rounded they are. So I think what happens with our desi mentality sometimes is we get very focused on just the grade and the test score, and we forget the rest of the holistic piece. And we forget to make our children as well-rounded as we can. They have great grades, but they're competing against all these other kids that there's kids that are doing philanthropic work, working with hunger in their communities, working with shelters. We have to be able to compete with that if we want to be successful.
And I just have one more last question. Over a couple of years now, especially with the Middle East trying to revolutionize the way the whole world is seeing them, they started opening a lot of American schools, like Mayo Clinic is trying to partner with them, and they have like the schools over there in Qatar and all of this, which are medical schools, but some of them are starting from high school. Do you feel that kids who get trained over there in med school over there would be accepted here in residency as much as, or would they still consider like a foreign medical graduates, even though they are citizens, but just because they study outside the United States, they're considered FMGs and not, they're considered US IMGs and not like...
With all the changes that have happened in the last 5 years, what you just said, the latter, they are considered foreign medical graduates. I think from a knowledge standpoint, they are smart. They know the medicine. But then to take the tests that are necessary, to get the clinical training, this is all done to keep that out as much. And it's affected the Caribbean schools. It's now pushed to try to affect those foreign medical schools. Ultimately, they have to let a certain amount of those in. There's just too many hospitals that are in need, particularly on the coasts, that need those type of candidates. But it is becoming increasingly difficult to make it back. And unless you know somebody or have a connection, or even knowing somebody is not the case as it used to be. Anybody else? Yes.
If you're a medical, let's say, foreign medical doctor and you apply for residency, is that okay? I mean, you don't want to be like competitive, you just want to like primary doctor.
Yeah.
It
It used to be. Even the internal medicine program, just to give you a perspective, if you had scored like under board examination, the USMLEs, if you had scored like in the 80th percentile, you're gonna find a seat. Now those same candidates are in the 96th plus percentile fighting for those same seats. And with the new changes that they've made in the last 2 years of the clinical experience to get licensing, removing the board scores, they've made it even that much more difficult to compete. I don't know what the effects are going to be these next few years. I'm already looking at how do I judge a candidate who's coming from overseas and I don't have a score for a U.S. student, I don't have their score. How do I compare them to say apples to apples?
They did say a long time ago that in 2020 they're going to be a huge shortage of all these lives and
Yeah.
And I see the opposite.
You see it.
Residency is very still the same. I mean,
They haven't changed the number of seats. The U.S. government controls that. They really need to increase the amount of residency slots, but that's money that they have to give the hospitals.
especially now with the Republican in the Congress,
Yeah.
raise the number of seats.
Yeah, they have not increased, as you saw, they have not increased the number of seats significantly in 20 years. And so until that changes, this pressure, the shortage we all know is coming. And especially after COVID, so many of our senior docs have left the medical field as a result. There's going to be a crisis that will occur at some point in time. So it'll be interesting to see.
It's, I mean, I'm talking like foreign medical doctor, but U.S. citizen, I mean, it's not going to happen to give it to the residency.
No, it doesn't matter. If you're applying as a foreign student, if you're a U.S. citizen applying, you might have a little bit of an edge over somebody who's foreign and has to apply for a J1, H1B. But if you can't get back in to do the clinical training to apply, that's
Well, I mean, let's see, you did the 1 year internship.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Again, your scores better be top notch. The margin of error is very less. You have a question?
Yeah, slightly different question. Could you maybe share with our kids what makes you excited about this role? I mean, what I see is a lot of number of years of
Yeah.
spend time, like 15 years of education, a lot of hard work. But why? What makes you excited besides the money part, right?
I mean, the money doesn't make it. If you're doing medicine for the money, you're in the wrong field.
That's what I would like.
You're absolutely wrong field. I will say that wholeheartedly. Yeah, alhamdulillah, I mean, I'm financially very secure, but if you're doing it for there's much easier ways to make money out there. But the thing I get to be a teacher. I think fundamentally I enjoy teaching. I teach a lot of the junior physicians. I love the relationships that I have with families, the connections. In my field particularly, I get to be the first doctor. And when they first have a baby, if the baby has issues, I'm the first physician that they trust. And particularly with neonatology, I think it's one of Allah's greatest fields in terms of I get to see miracles every day. I mean, alhamdulillah, it's a very humbling field to see the power of what happens each day for these babies. And it reaffirms, like, why I'm a Muslim and why I enjoy practicing medicine because of the field that I'm in. And so I get a tremendous amount of satisfaction from that. It's hard. I mean, believe me, there are days I come home and I'm like, oh my God, why am I doing this? But it is not easy, but none of our jobs are easy. I think everybody's job is meaningful and you have to make it meaningful to you. So, yes?
What fields are you seeing in the medical field like that are dying off and ones that are becoming like just that kind of we're not really talking about come to the forefront of medicine?
It's a great question. I would say like I don't know about necessarily dying off per se, but like geriatric care really kind of coming to the forefront because we have a lot more older population. So that's like the care of the elderly. We're seeing a lot more of our endocrine docs with diabetes. There's so many hundreds of thousands of cases each year of new onset diabetes. There's a lot more push and demand for areas in heart care, strokes, just because the health of Americans have changed rapidly over the years. I think even in family medicine, like one of the areas, if you look at rural America, the family medicine doc is your key, and we don't do well to them. I mean, when you look at the salaries of a family medicine doc, it doesn't incentivize them to do primary care when we desperately need those type of physicians. If you look in just to a central Illinois region, those docs are leaving en masse, and it's becoming run by nurse practitioners. And so I think fields like radiology, which had a heyday of making lots of money, technologies have changed, things have changed that it's kind of scaled the field down a bit. So I think the cost of care is just so expensive in the US, that's why it's attractive to a lot of people, because they think there's a lot of money to be made. But I think the health of Americans just continues to evolve, and there's certain demands that exist out there. I think pediatric subspecialties are hard because there's no money in those fields, and there's not enough incentive to become that. And then doing research in medicine, I think, has been more challenged over the last 10 years. So, any other questions?
So you spoke about, I have two questions. You spoke about the gap here in the secondary program.
Yeah.
So my question is, when they go for the secondary program, you said that they have to appear for the MCAT, and the score is like pretty high, 513 something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what happens if the student doesn't score that?
Then they don't give this. If you're in a guaranteed program and you don't fulfill their criteria, you lose your seat.
So that's like they're not going.
They'll give it to somebody else.
Guarantee that
It's guaranteed as long as you fulfill their criteria. So different schools have different criteria. I mean, my daughter's in a program right now in her freshman year, and their criteria for that program is that she has to maintain a 3.4 grade point average. And then as long as, that's the only criteria they have. And so as long as she maintains that through college, she does not need to take the MCAT score. And so,
So they get another opportunity to take the MCAT, or it's just like,
they can have opportunities, they just lose that guaranteed seat. Then they would have to apply like everybody else would apply.
and then you spoke about the gap year. So this is including the 4-year graduate program, or they cut down on 1 year?
No. This is, so you do your 4 years of undergrad, or what, 3 or 4 years undergrad, and then it's 1 to 3 in the middle, and then you start med school. So it's additional years. Yeah. Yeah.
But I have a question about residency.
Yeah.
So now, as you said, they're treating DO and MDs almost the same. Some programs that, for example, are going to take 2 MD and 1 DO.
Yeah.
So for these, and there is more MDs than DOs.
Yeah.
So for these competitive residencies, do you think that DOs they have an advantage or
No.
the same? Because the numbers are less.
Yeah, depending on where the residency is and which program. Some programs are still very stuck in their ways, so they only will take MDs and they don't take DOs. If you look at our pediatric, like if you look at our surgical program at OSF, they are very particular about taking DOs in the program. They only want MDs. So they sometimes will do some of that type of stuff, but that's less and less common. You're seeing more DOs kind of coming into the markets now in large programs like Boston Children's, which is Harvard-based, or Northwestern. They might differentiate a little bit more significantly between the MDs and DOs. How do you feel?
No, I think it's been normalized enough right now that MDs, DOs are essentially the same. I think the big differentiation, like Joel was saying, is between U.S. graduates, whether those MDs or DOs, versus the IMGs, FMGs. So that's where the big differentiation truly happens.
This is all done in an effort to push the Caribbean and foreign grads out of the market.
Yeah.
Is what's happening.
The
And even-
challenge.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say that the real challenge. I mean, looking at the residency programs, I mean, you almost can't emphasize enough how competitive it's gotten. So for how difficult it is for the IMGs, I think you might have mentioned this in one of the slides, but you can different programs, different numbers maybe, but you imagine for 10 slots of residency, where there's such a shortage of those residency spots, there may be 2,000 applicants. And so it's those
I mean, in
IMGs.
pediatrics, in my program in pediatrics, we have 12 residency slots. We have 4,500 applicants applying for those 12 spots. 4,500 of that, 2,000 of those are foreign graduates or Caribbean graduates, and 2,000 of them are American graduates. And from that, they will only offer interviews to 300. And from the 300, they'll give 12 slots. That's our program in Peoria.
How many from the Caribbean then? Are you guys allowed to take?
We can take as many as we want. We can take all of them, but
There's
I
no
mean,
limit, like,
but the
you're not allowed to
criteria,
say-
those Caribbean grads, instead, like I was telling one gentleman over here, instead of like having the 80th percentile, those grads that are applying for that, they're in the 98th percentile. So they are like the cream of the crop that probably would have, if they were in a U.S. school, probably be applying to the most competitive residencies. But they're applying for our programs because that's what's open to them. And so imagine if you scored like in the 85th percentile, you did decent, but you're competing against somebody who scored in the 98th percentile. It's a battle of attrition, unfortunately. So the margin of error really is tight. And so why make that so tight for you? I would recommend, and saying this coming from St. George's, I would recommend somebody go to the osteopathic school. If you can get in that way, that's the route to get in.
And or the higher degree of nursing.
Or the higher
I
degree
mean,
of nursing.
honestly, if you
Yeah, that's why I threw all those slides, the cost-benefit ratio.
Yes, exactly.
And I think I was like doctor. There are a lot of healthcare fields that are out there that you can do, mashallah, really well for yourself and a lot of opportunity without breaking most physicians come out with about $400,000 to $600,000 in debt when they start work. And so, yeah, it's great to make money, but when you have to, it's like a mortgage payment that you're paying, each month. And those physicians are in that debt for, if you're in primary care, most of your career, So.
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to know, the residency you're talking about Peoria, forget about Peoria. Let's see, other locations, for example, it's easier to get into
No.
residency?
No, and actually, Indiana's only got one residency program. Iowa's got like 2 residency programs, or 3 maybe.
Like New
I
York?
mean, Chicago, Illinois has got like 8, 9 residency programs. There's a lot of them.
But most of them are New York and California.
New York has a lot. California has a lot. California ones are very competitive. New York, well, those are the ones because you're in the. I don't know if you've been in those type of hospitals in New York City. They're like 150 years old, super like I mean, it is not many services. If you want to get an X-ray, you roll your patient down to the X-ray, get the X-ray. I mean, there's no ancillary services there. That's what the foreign grads are trying to get into.
So hello, Karen, for the presentation. You mentioned in the LECOM program that only 2 to 3 students are chosen from each of the universities. You said, would you like to explain that?
Benedictine,
Yes.
Elmhurst, and like Aurora,
Yes.
and
Are
North
only 2
Central.
to 3 students out of all of them who apply chosen for the
no. So the way that they do it is you have to apply to the university, get accepted, then apply to the LECOM program, and then they interview you, and they will say which university are you linking to, and you pick the one you want to pick, and then you're competing against that batch of students. So, like the Elmhurst is, I only know because of my kid, but with that program they had, I don't know, 60 kids applied to that Elmhurst, and they gave it to like 3 kids, and so it's like really, focused. But there's not a lot of resources at Elmhurst University. It's a small school. It's in like Elmhurst, Illinois, but that's a trade-off. You're not going to University of Illinois, Urbana, where you have all these resources, large crowd, mostly commuter students that are there. If you live there, it's great. But if you live in Peoria, then you have to live on campus. And so there's those trade-offs. But
definitely. And then I heard that doing engineering as an undergrad major, such as like biomedical engineering, helps with MCAT and also medical school further on. What is your opinion about that?
if that's something you enjoy, go for it. I mean, I think it's like I said, you can do whatever major you want, but you have to still take the pre-med courses, and so those are still part of it. Some people have more of an analytic mind. Yes, it's going to help with the biochemistry, but at the end of the day, I studied biology and religion. My minor was in music, and so I don't think it changed. I think if you took a survey of most people, their majors are either psychology, biology, chemistry. What did you major in?
Biology.
Biology, see? So, I mean, you'll rarely find somebody that does something like really off-ball, but just because all the work has to do with it.
One
Yes.
last question,
Yeah.
I promise. Is there some kind of organization, I've heard where, parents, for example, they're not in the medical field. Their kid is very passionate about going into it. Where they hire someone that's basically like their legit own counselor, director, guidance person that helps with navigating which colleges would be best for them, which programs they should look into. Have you heard of these programs?
I have not. I mean, what's that? I'll have counseling services outside. No, I don't know anything about that.
But yeah, okay, I didn't know if you knew.
I mean, my parents weren't physicians. I had lots of trial and
So
error.
you've been a great candidate for someone to come in.
Maybe.
for a
I
free
mean,
IUI.
I didn't know, and so I fell down a lot along the
Yeah.
way. And there was probably times that I didn't know I was going to make it through. I think that's probably why I'm as passionate about it now. Why I wanted to do teaching, because I don't want my kids or the kids in my community to have the same challenges that I have. My wife's the same way. She didn't want. She didn't have family. Her dad's an engineer. Her mom was at home, and it was we learned trial by error. Now we hope to be able to give a little bit better advantage for our kids when they're going through it, if that's what they want to do. If they don't want to do it, then I don't want to push them to do it.
I would be just really careful. I bet you there's a ton of scams out there.
I agree.
There's scams out there to get into undergrad programs. The recommendation would be to find somebody in the community that you know and you trust and can give you real advice. Or we're also lucky now where there's several generations of people that have gone into the medical field, whereas 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there was just the uncles that came from back home and got into residency, and those are the only ones we can go to for advice.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't a lot.
And they weren't given much advice at
They
the
weren't
time.
given exactly. So, but I would be careful that it's like that. Was it Lori Laughlin, whoever it was, the Aunt Becky's.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I did have a client that she said that her parents didn't have medical background, and her daughter wanted to get into medical school, and she basically hired literally her own advisor, and that helped pave the way, and basically said, hey, these are the avenues you need to take, this is what the classes, X, Y, and Z, and
Usually the college advisors.
The college will help you a little bit. Your
But
high
when you
school
pay
advisor will help
someone,
you a
it's
little bit.
different.
Yeah.
You have-
But I would be very much on his side. I think I'd be very careful about there's a lot of scams around there. You have a question? You're good?
Just one last.
Yeah, it's fine. We'll end with this one.
On the PharmD route, is it the same perception for foreign military graduates to get into the system? Or?
I don't know that nearly as well. I know it's with the other specialties that are non-medical, like dentistry and pharmacy. I think it's much harder to get because they want them to have a U.S.-based training. They don't even let you sit for those examinations. So I've had a lot of family that have tried to get into dentistry from back home, and they were dentists in India, Pakistan, and tried to come and just sit for their licensing and have really struggled getting into the system here. So I think the other healthcare fields are even more difficult to integrate back in. Medicine has a pathway, but it's as you saw, it's a tedious pathway. So, all right, yes. Okay.
So, as you were saying that for foreign medical graduates, they're going to get the field. So, I would think that there are some gap years kind of things where a student can do all these academies so that he can get better.
Yeah.
So, from that experience, let's say foreign medical graduate who has now worked as a back skill, and before if it requires because you're getting into the field, if you does something like masters and something like or PhD, if there is a chance, doing a PhD and then maybe you hold it.
So there's a lot of them that try that path, that very pathway. The problem is that if you haven't done clinicals in the U.S., you can't even sit for the application for the examination. So you have to get the clinical access to do the clinical training, and that's where a lot of the foreign medical graduates hit the dead end. So then,
Last year, like 3,700 INF, where, I was looking at the statistics, okay, and you got depots, MDs,
Yeah.
foreign medical.
3,700 out of 35,000 probably applying.
Yeah, but 4,000 were accepted. They weren't.
I'm not saying they can't get in, but there are. It's a lot harder. The challenges of getting in are much more challenging. And so what they've continued to evolve the rules. They got rid of the USMLE just in the last 2 years. We're going to first see this next academic year is the first year we're going to see where the USMLEs are not there. I'm intrigued to find out how the program directors handle it, because how do you measure candidates if it's just pass fail? And then they also have changed the clinical training rules. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Dr. Manjan, so this question is coming from my daughter in my mind.
Yeah.
So, what major challenges do you see from Muslim women at workplaces besides this unique schedule that you guys have to deal with compared to engineers?
I don't personally. That's probably a better question for my wife. Mashallah, I think the women are the way that the healthcare system is set up, the way that the hospital system, they will do everything to make it work for them. I think in this day, back 20 years ago, I think there was much more that acceptance, and especially if somebody was hijab wearing and having a hard time trying to integrate. And I think those barriers are down. We have so many of our faculty and colleagues that are hijab wearing, and I think pioneers like Dr. Nala, a lot of the physicians in the community, Dr. Nadia Sheikh, these ladies have done such a tremendous job being outstanding in their field, great medical knowledge, humble human beings, and doing an amazing job in their work while still maintaining and being a Muslim women. And so I think as those pioneers continue to set the modality, it is changing the way that non-Muslims kind of vision and visualize our Muslim women and their role within the medical field. And before it would be like an epiphany. Oh my God, there's a hijabi woman coming in. Now nobody even thinks twice about it. In fact, they now recognize like Ramadan. They recognize like, hey, it's time for you to pray. Like there's a lot more of that, I think, acceptance in the communities. And so I think alhamdulillah, I think it shouldn't be an issue, and I think it's continuing to evolve as we kind of become more of this diverse school. I mean, now look at it. Even Dunlap High School, they're celebrating hijab. Like I couldn't even fathom that when I was a kid growing up. And so
sorry to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
How do the students here in Peoria where you can join like the simulation center, or they want to do something?
I would contact OSF Volunteer Services and say, hey, I want to do work in this area, and then they can tell you what opportunities are available. Yep. Thank you so much.
Thank you. On behalf of ISP, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Louis for arranging this, and Dr. Ibrahim and Fuad for setting it up. Jazakumullah khair. I hope you all have a good day.
Thank you.